single push. One moment of anger, and everything changed for the royal family forever. When Camilla's son lost his temper and shoved a royal guard during a heated argument, nobody could have predicted what would happen next. The walls of the palace would whisper secrets, relationships would crumble, and a scandal would emerge that threatened to tear apart one of the most powerful families in the world. This is the true story of how one violent outburst exposed the hidden fractures within the monarchy and changed the course of royal history. Stay with us to discover what really happened. Behind those palace doors, the morning of March 15th started like any other day at Clarence House. The sun barely peeked through the heavy curtains as staff members quietly moved through the corridors. Preparing for another day of royal duties, Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's eldest son from her first marriage, had arrived earlier that morning for what was supposed to be a private family breakfast. He had been dealing with mounting pressure from the media about his mother's role in the royal family, and the stress was clearly visible on his face. Tom had always maintained a relatively low profile compared to... He was a successful food writer and critic, someone who preferred the comfort of restaurants and kitchens to the rigid protocols of palace life. But being Camilla's son meant he could never fully escape the spotlight, no matter how much he tried. The constant scrutiny, the endless comparisons to the late Princess Diana's family, and the public's mixed feelings about his mother had been weighing heavily on him for months. That morning, Tom had come to discuss a particularly nasty article that had been published in one of the tabloids. The piece had made cruel comments about his mother, and had even dragged his children into the narrative. He was furious, and rightfully so. His mother had tried to calm him down over the phone the night before, but his anger had only grown stronger overnight. He needed answers. He needed action. And he needed someone to take responsibility for the security breach that had allowed photographers to get uncomfortably close to his family during a private outing. As Tom waited in one of the sitting rooms, his frustration continued to build. The palace staff moved around him with their usual efficiency. But to him, they seemed oblivious to the real problems facing his family. He paced back and forth, checking his phone repeatedly, reading and rereading the hateful comments under the online version of the article. Each word felt like a knife, and his protective instincts as a son and father were in overdrive. Officer James Mitchell, a royal protection officer who had been with the family for nearly 8 years, was stationed near the entrance to the private quarters that morning. He was a decorated veteran, someone who took his duty seriously and had never had a single complaint filed against him. James was known for his calm demeanor and his ability to handle difficult situations with grace. He had protected various members of the royal family through countless events, travels, and even a few security scares. His record was impeccable, and he was respected by everyone who worked alongside him. When Tom emerged from the sitting room, still clutching his phone and visibly agitated, he immediately approached Officer Mitchell. He demanded to know why the security protocols had failed, why photographers had been able to get so close to his family, and why nobody seemed to be taking the matter seriously. His voice was raised, his gestures were sharp, and his usual composure had completely disappeared. Officer Mitchell, maintaining his professional stance, tried to explain that he was not directly involved in the security arrangements for private family outings, and that Tom would need to speak with the head of security to address his concerns properly. But Tom was beyond reason at that point. The weeks of accumulated stress, the constant attacks on his mother, and the feeling of helplessness had reached a breaking point. He felt like he was getting another bureaucratic runaround, another polite dismissal of his legitimate concerns. The argument escalated quickly. Tom's voice grew louder, echoing through the usually quiet corridors. Staff members began to slow their pace, glancing nervously in the direction of the commotion. Some pretended not to notice, while others exchanged worried looks. This kind of confrontation was highly unusual in the carefully controlled environment of the royal household, where discretion and decorum were paramount. Officer Mitchell remained calm but firm. He repeated that he understood Tom's frustration, but insisted that he follow the proper channels. This response only infuriated Tom further. In his mind, proper channels had failed repeatedly. The proper channels had allowed his family to be harassed. The proper channels had done nothing to protect his mother from vicious attacks. He felt trapped in a system that protected its own procedures more than it protected the people it was supposed to serve. Then it happened. In a moment of complete loss of control, Tom stepped forward and shoved Officer Mitchell with both hands. It wasn't a punch or a violent attack, but it was unmistakably physical contact. An aggressive push that caused the officer to stumble backward a few steps. The officer's training immediately kicked in, and he steadied himself without retaliating. His face remained neutral, but his hand had instinctively moved toward his radio. The corridor fell silent. The few staff members who had witnessed the incident froze in place, unsure of what to do. Tom himself seemed shocked by his own actions. His hands were still raised slightly, trembling now with a mixture of adrenaline and immediate regret. Officer Mitchell straightened his uniform, his jaw tight. His eyes locked on Tom with a look that was neither angry nor afraid, just intensely professional and alert. Before anyone could speak, another security officer appeared from around the corner, having heard the raised voices. Within seconds, 2 more staff members arrived, including one of the senior household managers. Tom stood there, breathing heavily, realizing the magnitude of what he had just done. Pushing a royal protection officer wasn't just inappropriate or rude, it was assault. It was a criminal offense. And it had happened within the walls of a royal residence, where every action was documented, every incident reported, and every breach of protocol taken with the utmost seriousness. Officer Mitchell finally spoke, his voice steady and professional. He asked Tom to please step back and wait in the sitting room while he reported the incident to his supervisor. Tom, now coming down from his rage, nodded silently. The fight had drained out of him as quickly as it had erupted. He walked back to the sitting room on shaky legs, his mind racing with the potential consequences of what he had just done. The senior household manager, a woman named Patricia who had worked for the royal family for over 2 decades, immediately went to inform Camilla. She found the queen consort in her private office, reviewing correspondence for the day's engagements. When Patricia quietly explained what had happened, Camilla's face went pale. She set down her pen, closed her eyes for a moment, and then asked for the full details. Patricia provided them as diplomatically as possible, but there was no way to soften the blow. Her son had physically assaulted a member of the royal protection. Camilla dismissed Patricia and sat alone in her office for several minutes, trying to process the information. She knew Tom had been under tremendous pressure. She had seen him struggling with the constant public criticism and the toll it was taking on his mental health and his family. But this was beyond anything she had anticipated. This wasn't a heated phone call with a journalist or an angry social media post. This was a physical altercation with a security officer, someone who was there to protect them, not to be attacked. Meanwhile, Officer Mitchell was in a secure room, giving his formal statement to his commanding officer. The report was clear, factual, and damning. There were witnesses. There would be documentation. And because of who Tom was and where it happened, this incident would not simply disappear. The protocols were clear. Any assault on a protection officer, regardless of who committed it, had to be formally reported and investigated. There were no exceptions, not even for the queen consort's son. Tom sat in the sitting room, his head in his hands, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He had let his anger control him, and now there would be consequences. He thought about his children, his mother, and the embarrassment this would cause his entire family. He thought about Officer Mitchell, a man who had done nothing wrong except try to do his job. The shame began to settle over him like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. Within the hour, news of the incident had reached the highest levels of the royal household. Private secretaries were notified, legal advisors were consulted, and security protocols were reviewed. The question on everyone's mind was not whether the incident had happened, but how to handle it moving forward. Could it be kept private? Should charges be pressed? What would the public reaction be if the story leaked? And most importantly, what would the king say when he found out his stepson had assaulted a member of his protection team? The investigation began within hours of the incident. Commander Stephen Barnes, head of Royal Protection, arrived at Clarence's house by noon with a small team of investigators. His face was grave as he was briefed on the situation. Commander Barnes had overseen security for the royal family for nearly 15 years, and he had dealt with many complicated situations, but this one presented unique challenges. The victim was one of his own officers, a man with an impeccable record. The perpetrator was the Queen Consort's son, someone who technically wasn't a working royal, but was still closely connected to the monarchy officer. Mitchell was interviewed first. He sat in a secure office, still in his uniform, and provided a detailed account of everything that had happened. He described Tom's aggressive approach, the escalating argument, and the moment of physical contact. His account was professional and measured, without embellishment or emotion. He didn't try to minimize what had happened, but he also didn't exaggerate. When asked if he wanted to press charges, Officer Mitchell paused for a long moment before saying he needed time to think about it. He understood the implications either way, and he didn't take the decision lightly. Tom was interviewed next. He was accompanied by a lawyer that Camilla had quickly arranged for him. Tom was cooperative, admitting everything without hesitation. He didn't try to justify his actions or make excuses. He acknowledged that he had been under stress, but took full responsibility for losing control. He apologized repeatedly and expressed genuine remorse for his behavior. His lawyer advised him to say as little as possible, but Tom felt compelled to explain his state of mind, hoping it might provide some context, if not forgiveness. The witnesses were interviewed one by one. A junior staff member who had been carrying linens down the corridor described hearing raised voices and then seeing the push. A footman who had arrived moments after the incident corroborated Officer Mitchell's account. Patricia, the senior household manager, provided details about Tom's demeanor when he arrived that morning, how she had immediately informed the Queen Consort after the incident. Each testimony painted the same picture. A man who had lost control and committed an act of aggression against someone, who was simply doing his job. Camilla requested a private meeting with Commander Barnes later that afternoon. She received him in her office, and for the first time that day, her composure cracked slightly. She asked about Officer Mitchell's well-being and expressed her deep regret over what her son had done. She made it clear that she did not expect or want any special treatment for Tom, that he should face whatever consequences were appropriate. But she also shared her concerns about the impact this would have on the family, on Tom's children, and on the monarchy's reputation if the story became public. Commander Barnes listened respectfully. He assured her that Officer Mitchell was physically unharmed, and that the investigation would be conducted with complete professionalism. But he also had to be honest with her. This was a serious matter. Assault on a protection officer was not something that could be swept under the rug, regardless of who was involved. There were legal obligations, reporting requirements, and protocols that had to be followed. The decision about whether to press charges would ultimately rest with Officer Mitchell, but the investigation itself would be thorough and documented. Meanwhile, word of the incident had begun to spread through the palace staff, despite efforts to keep it quiet. In an environment where discretion was supposedly guaranteed, information still flowed through informal channels. Staff members whispered in break rooms, speculation grew, and different versions of the story began to emerge. Some accounts had Tom throwing a punch. Others said Officer Mitchell had provoked him. The truth was getting lost in a fog of gossip and embellishment. By late afternoon, the king had been informed. His private secretary delivered the news in person, providing him with a written summary of the incident and the ongoing investigation. The king's reaction was one of deep disappointment and concern. He immediately asked to speak with Camilla. When they met, he was supportive of his wife, but firm about the seriousness of the situation. He loved his stepson, but he also had a responsibility to his staff and to the integrity of the institution he represented. They would have to let the investigation run its course and face whatever consequences came from it. Tom spent the rest of the day in a guest room at Clarence's house, essentially isolated while the investigation continued. His sister Laura had been contacted and offered to come, but Tom asked her to stay away, not wanting to drag her into the mess he had created. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, replaying not just that morning but the entire past year. He thought about all the times he could have handled things differently. All the times he could have sought help for his stress and anger instead of letting it build up. He thought about his mother, who had endured so much criticism over the years with remarkable grace, and how he had failed to show even a fraction of that same composure. Officer Mitchell went home that evening to his family. His wife could tell immediately that something was wrong. When he finally told her what had happened, she was outraged on his behalf. She wanted him to press charges immediately, to make an example out of Tom Parker Bowles, to show that nobody was above the law. But Mitchell wasn't sure. He had spent his entire career protecting people. Even those who didn't always appreciate it or understand the sacrifices involved. He knew Tom wasn't a bad person. He was someone who had made a terrible mistake in a moment of weakness. But he also knew that letting it go without consequences would send a dangerous message. The following day, Commander Barnes presented his preliminary findings to the royal household's legal team. The evidence was clear and consistent. Tom Parker Bowles had committed assault. The question now was how to proceed. The legal advisors outlined several options. Tom could be formally charged through the criminal justice system, which would likely result in a public trial and immense media coverage. Alternatively, if Officer Mitchell chose not to press charges, Tom could face internal disciplinary measures, though he wasn't technically an employee of the royal household. A third option was some form of mediation or restorative justice process, though that would require both parties to agree. Camilla met with Tom that afternoon. It was an emotional conversation. She told him how disappointed she was. It's not just in his actions, but in the fact that he had been struggling so badly without reaching out for help. Tom broke down, apologizing through tears, explaining how overwhelmed he had felt by everything. Camilla held her son and assured him that she still loved him. But she also made it clear that love didn't mean protecting him from consequences. He would have to face what he had done and work to make amends. Officer Mitchell was given a few days to decide whether he wanted to pursue criminal charges. During that time, he spoke with colleagues, family members, and a counselor provided by the Royal Protection Unit. Everyone had different opinions. Some told him to throw the book at Tom, stand up for himself and all protection officers who were too often treated as invisible servants. Others urged compassion, pointing out that Tom was clearly dealing with mental health struggles and that ruining his life wouldn't serve anyone. Mitchell found himself torn between justice and mercy, between accountability and forgiveness. The media, meanwhile, had begun to sense that something was happening. Royal correspondents noticed increased activity at Clarence House and unusual movements of security personnel. Inquiries were made to the palace press office, but official responses were limited to no comment on private family matters. This only fueled more speculation. Tabloid journalists began reaching out to palace staff, offering money for information. The palace security team worked overtime to identify and plug any potential leaks. A week after the incident, Officer Mitchell made his decision. He requested a meeting with Commander Barnes and Tom Parker Bowles. When they sat down together in a private office, the tension was palpable. Officer Mitchell spoke first. He explained how the incident had affected him, how it had made him question his safety and the respect given to protection officers. He acknowledged that Tom had shown genuine remorse and that he believed Tom wasn't a violent person by nature. After considering everything, Officer Mitchell said he would not be pressing criminal charges, but only under certain conditions. Tom listened intently as Officer Mitchell laid out his terms. First, Tom would have to issue a formal, written apology, not just to Mitchell, but to all Royal Protection officers. Second, Tom would have to participate in an anger management program and provide proof of completion. Third, Tom would make a significant donation to a charity that supported veterans and first responders. And finally, Tom would have to meet with Officer Mitchell one more time after completing the program to demonstrate that he had genuinely learned from the experience. Tom agreed to all the conditions without hesitation. He thanked Officer Mitchell for his mercy and promised to fulfill every requirement. The relief in the room was visible. But everyone understood that this was just the beginning of a long process of accountability and healing. Commander Barnes documented the agreement and made it clear that any future incident of any kind would result in immediate criminal charges with no possibility of leniency. The royal household's legal team drafted the necessary documents and both parties signed. The incident would remain private, documented only in internal files. No public statement would be made. Tom would begin his anger management program the following week. The donation to the charity would be processed through proper channels to avoid any appearance of trying to buy his way out of consequences. Officer Mitchell would return to his duties, with additional support services made available to him if needed. But even as the formal investigation concluded, the emotional aftermath was far from over. Trust had been broken not just between two individuals, but within the entire household. Staff members who had witnessed or heard about the incident looked at Tom differently now. Some felt sympathy for him. Others felt he had gotten off too easily. The incident had exposed tensions and vulnerabilities that had been simmering beneath the surface of royal life for years, and everyone knew that while this particular crisis had been contained, the underlying problems that had led to it remained unresolved. The weeks following the incident were some of the most difficult Camilla had experienced since becoming queen consort. While the formal investigation had concluded and criminal charges had been avoided, the emotional toll on the family was immense. She found herself caught between her loyalty to her son and her responsibility to the institution she now represented. Every decision felt like a betrayal of someone she loved, and the weight of it was exhausting. Tom had moved back to his own home, but maintained minimal contact with the rest of the family. He attended his anger management sessions twice a week with a therapist who specialized in stress-related behavioral issues. The sessions were difficult and often painful, forcing him to confront not just the incident with Officer Mitchell, but years of accumulated resentment and unprocessed emotions. Related to his mother's position in the royal family, he had never fully dealt with the public hatred directed at his mother after her relationship with Charles became public, or the constant comparisons to Diana that had haunted his entire adult life. During one particularly intense session, Tom broke down completely. He admitted to his therapist that he had spent decades feeling like he had to defend his mother against the entire world, that he had absorbed so much of the public's anger and projected it onto everyone around him. The incident with Officer Mitchell hadn't really been about security protocols or photographers. It had been about years of feeling powerless, of watching his mother be vilified, and of being unable to protect her from the cruelty of public opinion. The therapist helped him understand that while his protective instincts were natural, his methods of expressing them had become destructive. Camilla, meanwhile, was dealing with her own emotional turmoil. She felt guilty for not recognizing how badly Tom had been struggling. As a mother, she felt she should have seen the warning signs, should have intervened before things reached a breaking point. But she had been so focused on her royal duties, on proving herself worthy of her position, that she had missed what was happening in her own family. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years trying to win over the British public while losing touch with her own son's pain. The king tried to be supportive, but the situation had created tension in their relationship as well. He understood Camilla's maternal instincts, but he also had to consider the broader implications for the monarchy. The incident, though kept private, had exposed vulnerabilities in how the royal household managed family-related crises. He ordered a full review of security protocols and staff support systems, determined to prevent similar situations in the future. But in quiet moments, he worried about what this meant for Camilla's peace of mind and their relationship. Tom's sister, Laura, became an unexpected source of strength during this period. She had always maintained a lower profile than Tom, managing to keep her family life relatively private despite her mother's position. When she finally sat down with Tom, she didn't lecture or judge. Instead, she shared her own struggles with the public scrutiny, her own moments of anger and frustration. She told him about the times she had wanted to lash out, to defend their mother publicly, but had chosen instead to focus on her own family and her own peace. Her words helped Tom realize that he didn't have to carry the burden of defending his mother alone, that she was stronger than he gave her credit for. The impact on Officer Mitchell and his colleagues was significant as well. While Mitchell had shown remarkable restraint and compassion in how he handled the situation, other protection officers felt vulnerable and undervalued. An anonymous letter was circulated among the security staff, expressing concerns about their safety and the message sent by allowing Tom to avoid criminal prosecution. The letter argued that if someone closely connected to the royal family could physically assault an officer without facing legal consequences, What protection did they really have? Commander Barnes called a special meeting with the entire protection team. He addressed their concerns directly, acknowledging the difficulty of the situation. He explained the agreement that had been reached, emphasizing that Officer Mitchell himself had chosen this path and that significant consequences had been imposed on Tom. He assured them that any future incident would be handled differently, with zero tolerance for physical aggression, regardless of who was involved. But the meeting was tense, and it was clear that trust within the security team had been damaged. The king, recognizing the severity of the morale problem, made an unprecedented decision. He requested a private meeting with the entire Royal Protection Unit without any other staff or family members present. During this meeting, he thanked them for their service, acknowledged the difficult position they had been put in by the incident, and gave them his personal assurance that their safety and dignity were priorities. He told them that Officer Mitchell had shown extraordinary professionalism and that his decision to pursue a restorative justice approach rather than criminal charges reflected his character. Not a lack of accountability for Tom's actions, Tom completed his anger management program after 3 months of intensive therapy. His therapist provided documentation of his progress, noting significant improvements in his emotional regulation and stress management techniques. Tom had learned to identify his triggers, to recognize when his anger was building, and to use healthy coping mechanisms instead of letting frustration explode into violence. But more importantly, he had begun to understand the roots of his anger and to develop compassion for himself and others. As part of his agreement with Officer Mitchell, Tom made a substantial donation to a veterans support charity that provided mental health services to former military and first responders. He didn't want any publicity for the donation, but the charity's director reached out to thank him personally. During their conversation, Tom opened up about his own experience and the lessons he had learned. The director suggested that Tom might consider volunteering with the organization once he had fully completed his program, noting that his story could help others who struggled with anger and stress. The final meeting between Tom and Officer Mitchell took place on a quiet afternoon at a neutral location, a private room in a counseling center. Both men were nervous, but Tom more so. He had prepared what he wanted to say, but when he saw Officer Mitchell, the words initially failed him. Mitchell, ever the professional, broke the ice by asking Tom how he was doing. They sat down, and Tom finally found his voice. He apologized again, more eloquently this time, explaining what he had learned about himself and his behavior. He acknowledged the privilege that had protected him from criminal prosecution, something most people wouldn't have received. He thanked Mitchell for giving him a chance to grow and change rather than simply face punishment. Mitchell listened carefully, then shared his own perspective. He explained that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened, but about releasing the hold that anger, resentment could have on both of them. He told Tom that he hoped this experience would make him a better father, son, and person, and that would be the real justice in the situation. They shook hands at the end of the meeting, and while they would never be friends, there was a mutual respect that hadn't existed before. Officer Mitchell returned to his duties with a sense of closure, feeling that his decision had been vindicated. Tom left the meeting feeling genuinely changed, not just by the therapy, but by Mitchell's grace and dignity throughout the entire ordeal. But the ripples of the incident continued to spread through the family. Tom's children, who were old enough to understand that something serious had happened, had been affected by the stress in their father's emotional state. His ex-wife had been concerned about the incident and its impact on the children, leading to difficult conversations about co-parenting and ensuring the children's stability. Tom had to work hard to rebuild their trust and show them that he was getting help in making real changes. Camilla's relationship with Tom began to heal slowly. They started having regular dinners together, just the two of them, where they could talk honestly about everything. Camilla opened up about her own guilt and regrets, and Tom shared his ongoing journey in therapy. These conversations were sometimes painful, but always necessary. They were rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of greater honesty and vulnerability than had existed before. The king and Camilla also had to process the incident's impact on their marriage. In couples counseling, which they had quietly begun attending, they discussed how the stress of royal life affected their family relationships. The king admitted that he had sometimes prioritized the institution over individual well-being, while Camilla acknowledged that she had tried to keep her children separate from royal life in ways that had actually made things harder. They committed to being more present and attentive to family needs, even when royal duties were demanding. The incident had also sparked private discussions within the broader royal family about mental health and support systems. The king's younger relatives, who had been vocal about mental health issues in the past, saw the incident as evidence that the palace needed better structures for supporting family members who were struggling. Plans were quietly developed to provide counseling services and stress management resources, not just for working royals but for extended family members who dealt with public scrutiny without any of the benefits of official royal status. Tom's transformation didn't happen overnight, and there were setbacks along the way. There were days when he felt overwhelmed by guilt. Other days when he felt angry at the circumstances that had led to his breaking point. But he kept showing up to therapy, kept practicing the techniques he had learned, kept working on rebuilding the relationships that had been damaged. He also began to establish better boundaries with the media and with his own consumption of news about his mother and the royal family. 6 months after the incident, Tom wrote a long letter to Officer Mitchell. Even though they had already had their final meeting, he wanted to document his continued progress and his gratitude. He described how the experience had changed him, how it had forced him to confront aspects of himself that he had been avoiding for years. He acknowledged that he could never fully undo what he had done, but he hoped that his changed behavior and his commitment to helping others might create some positive meaning from such a negative event. Officer Mitchell received the letter, but didn't respond, which Tom understood and respected. Some acts of grace don't require acknowledgement. They simply exist as gifts given freely. A year after the incident, life had returned to a new kind of normal for everyone involved. The story had never leaked to the press, a minor miracle given how many people knew about it. The staff members who had witnessed the incident had shown remarkable discretion, understanding that some things were better kept private for everyone's sake, but the memory of what had happened continued to shape the lives and decisions of everyone involved in ways both obvious and subtle. Tom had completed not just his anger management program but had continued with regular therapy sessions. He had come to view his mental health maintenance the same way he viewed physical health, something that required ongoing attention and care rather than just intervention during crisis. His therapist had helped him understand that the incident with Officer Mitchell was a symptom of much deeper issues related to identity, family loyalty, and unprocessed trauma from decades of public scrutiny. Working through these issues had been painful, but ultimately liberating. His relationship with his children had actually improved significantly. The incident had forced him to be more honest with them about his struggles and more present in their lives. His ex-wife had noticed the changes and had become more flexible with custody arrangements. Seeing that Tom was genuinely committed to being a better father, his kids had seen him at his worst, but they were also seeing him take responsibility and do the work to change. That lesson, he hoped, would stay with them throughout their lives. Tom had also followed through on the charity director's suggestion to volunteer with the Veterans Support Organization. He started by helping with fundraising events, using his connections and his mother's profile to bring attention and resources to the cause. Eventually, he began participating in peer support groups, sharing his own story with veterans and first responders who struggled with anger and stress. He never disclosed the specific details of his incident with Officer Mitchell, but he spoke honestly about losing control and the journey back from that place. Many of the people he talked with found his openness refreshing, especially coming from someone connected to the royal family. Camilla had also changed in the aftermath of the incident. She had become more intentional about protecting time for her family, sometimes pushing back on royal engagements when they conflicted with important family moments. Her staff noticed that she was more willing to delegate and less driven by the need to prove herself worthy of her position. The incident had reminded her that no amount of public approval was worth losing her children, and that realization had given her a new sense of perspective on her role. She and Tom had developed a tradition of monthly lunches, just the two of them, away from palaces and formality. They went to quiet restaurants where they could talk freely, or sometimes just walked in parks where anonymity was easier to maintain. During these times, they've discussed everything from family gossip to philosophy. From Tom's therapy insights to Camilla's frustrations with royal protocol, these conversations had deepened their relationship in ways that the crisis-driven interactions of the past never could. Officer Mitchell had remained in his position with royal protection. Though he had been offered opportunities to transfer if he preferred, he had chosen to stay. Partly because he loved the work, and partly because leaving would have felt like letting the incident define him. His colleagues had come to respect his decision to pursue restorative justice rather than prosecution, seeing it as a sign of strength rather than weakness. He had been promoted to a training role, where he now helped educate new protection officers not just in physical security protocols, but in de-escalation techniques and emotional intelligence. In his training sessions, Mitchell would sometimes reference the incident without naming anyone involved, using it as a teaching moment about maintaining professionalism even when disrespected or physically confronted. He emphasized that protection work wasn't just about physical courage, but about emotional restraint and the wisdom to know when mercy served justice better than punishment. His recruits found these lessons valuable, and many later told him that his approach to teaching had changed how they viewed their role. Mitchell's family had also been affected by the incident and its resolution. His wife had initially been angry that he didn't press charges, feeling that he had let someone off easy because of their connections. But as she watched the situation unfold over the following months, seeing Tom's genuine efforts to change and the positive ripple effects on both families, she came to appreciate her husband's choice. Their teenage daughter had been particularly moved by her father's compassion, telling him that he had shown her what real strength looked like. The king had implemented several changes within the royal household as a direct result of the incident. A comprehensive support system was established for all family members, working royals or not, providing access to mental health services, stress management resources, and conflict resolution professionals. The palace also created clearer protocols for handling internal incidents, ensuring that staff were protected while also allowing for restorative justice approaches when appropriate. These changes were made quietly, without public announcement, but they represented a significant shift in how the institution approached human welfare. Commander Barnes had overseen the implementation of these new protocols and had seen positive changes in staff morale and well-being. The protection team, which had been demoralized by the incident, gradually regained their confidence as they saw that their concerns were being taken seriously. The anonymous letter that had circulated after the incident was never officially responded to, but the actions taken spoke louder than any formal reply could have. Tom's sister, Laura, had played a crucial role in keeping the family together during the difficult months. She had served as a bridge between Tom and their mother when direct communication was too painful, and she had helped both of them see the other's perspective. Her own experience navigating royal connections, while maintaining privacy, had given her valuable insights that she shared with her brother. She had also become closer to the king during this time, appreciating his efforts to balance institutional responsibilities with family loyalty. The incident had also changed how Tom approached his public life. He had always been somewhat in the spotlight due to his mother's position and his own career as a food critic and writer. But after the incident, he became more selective about media appearances and more protective of his personal boundaries. He learned to decline interview requests that he knew would focus on his mother or the royal family rather than his work. He developed a clearer sense of his own identity separate from his connection to royalty, which ironically made him more comfortable with that connection. His work as a food critic had actually benefited from his personal growth. His writing became more introspective and empathetic, showing a deeper understanding of the human stories behind restaurants and chefs. He wrote a particularly moving piece about a chef who had rebuilt his life after struggles with anger and addiction. And while Tom never explicitly connected it to his own experience, readers sensed the authenticity in his words. The piece won an award and led to increased interest in his work. One unexpected outcome of the incident was that Tom and Officer Mitchell's paths crossed occasionally at charity events related to the Veterans Organization. They maintained a professional distance, never becoming friends, but acknowledging each other with respectful nods. At one event, they were briefly introduced to someone who didn't know their history, and they had a brief, polite conversation about the charity's work. It was an ordinary moment, but for both of them, it represented how far they had come from that terrible morning a year earlier. The palace staff who had witnessed the incident had their own processing to do. Some had been traumatized by seeing such an explosive confrontation in what was supposed to be a controlled, dignified environment. The palace brought in counselors to help staff members who wanted to talk about what they had experienced. These sessions revealed that many staff members had been carrying stress and anxiety about various aspects of their work, and the incident had simply brought these feelings to the surface. The counseling services became a permanent offering, helping to create a healthier work environment. Patricia, the senior household manager who had first informed Camilla about the incident, had reflected often on that day. She had worked in royal households her entire career and had seen many difficult situations, but this one had affected her deeply. She had watched Camilla's face when receiving the news, had seen a mother's heart break for her son, and had felt the weight of institutional responsibility clash with human compassion. The experience had made her more empathetic in her own management style, more aware that everyone in the palace, from the highest royals to the newest staff members, was carrying invisible burdens. Tom's children, now old enough to understand more of what had happened, had eventually asked their father direct questions about that time when he seemed so sad and stressed. He had been honest with them in age-appropriate ways, explaining that he had made a serious mistake and had hurt someone, and that he had worked hard to understand why it happened and to make sure it never happened again. His oldest child asked if the person he hurt had forgiven him, and Tom said he thought so, but, more importantly, he had learned to forgive himself while still taking responsibility. It was a complex lesson, but one he hoped they would carry with them. The donation Tom had made to the Veterans Charity had grown into an ongoing relationship. He had established a fund in his own name that provided scholarships for first responders and veterans seeking mental health treatment. He managed the fund personally, reviewing applications and sometimes reaching out to recipients to hear their stories. This work gave him a sense of purpose beyond his career and his family, a way to channel his experiences into something positive. Camilla had started using her platform more openly to discuss mental health issues, particularly the unique pressures faced by people in the public eye and their families. She never referenced her son's incident directly, but people who knew the situation understood where her passion came from. She became a patron of several mental health organizations and used her loyal engagements to highlight the importance of emotional well-being alongside physical health. Some critics accused her of hypocrisy, given the privacy surrounding Tom's incident, but she remained focused on the broader message rather than defending herself against critics. The king and Camilla's relationship had emerged stronger from the crisis. Going through such a difficult family situation together, supporting each other through the guilt and worry and conflict, had deepened their bond. They had learned to communicate more effectively about family matters, to present a united front when making difficult decisions. The couple's counseling they had begun during the crisis continued, not because their marriage was in trouble, but because they had seen the value in having a space to process the unique challenges of their position. 2 years after the incident, Tom published a book of essays about food, family, and finding peace. The final essay, titled "The Meal After," was about preparing and sharing a simple dinner with his mother after a long period of estrangement. He never explained what had caused the estrangement, but anyone who read carefully could sense the depth of pain that had been worked through. The essay ended with them washing dishes together, a mundane activity made sacred by the simple fact that they were together again, having chosen forgiveness and growth over resentment and distance. Officer Mitchell read the essay and recognized himself in its shadows, though he was never named. He appreciated that Tom had found a way to tell part of his story without exploiting their shared experience. He sent a brief message through Commander Barnes. Just 2 words: "Well done." Tom received the message and kept the paper it was written on in his desk drawer. A reminder that some connections, even those born from terrible circumstances, carried a weight and meaning that transcended conventional relationships. The incident remained a secret from the public, but it became a turning point in several lives. It had shown that even people with privilege and resources could struggle profoundly with mental health. It had demonstrated that justice could take many forms, and that sometimes the path to healing required courage from everyone involved. It had reminded a powerful family that institutional responsibility and human compassion didn't have to be opposing forces, and it had given everyone involved a deeper understanding of how fragile control could be and how essential it was to build systems of support before crises occurred. Years later, when historians would eventually write about this period of the monarchy, the incident would likely remain a footnote or be entirely unknown. But for the people who lived through it, who were changed by it, who grew because of it, the incident was anything but minor. It was a moment when everything could have gone terribly wrong, when lives could have been destroyed by pride, anger, or institutional rigidity. Instead, it became a moment when people chose a harder but ultimately more redemptive path. And that choice echoed through the years in ways large and small, shaping the kind of people they became and the kind of institution they served.